Well, good evening. Thank you. I appreciate that nice introduction. I face a bit of a challenge here. It's pushing on 1 a.m. for all of us on the East Coast. We've got a few distractions here. The original plan was I had agreed with the Padres to have exciting hits, home runs, and so forth at key parts of my 10-minute talk. If they're not going to cooperate, then I'm going to rely on you to woo and and be excited. But it is indeed a humbling honor to be here. You've heard from my counterparts, what a legacy this award represents and how proud I am to be part of it. So thank you for that. Thank you to the McGraw family, Terry and Sue in particular. This is an organization and a ceremony that is run with complete class, and more than that, with a great deal of heart. It's clear that this is coming as an homage to Harold W. McGraw, who really believed with all of his being in the importance of education, and that's carried on by subsequent generations. I appreciate the hospitality and the support of President Crow and all of our good colleagues across ASU who are here and some who are not, who have been such good allies in our efforts, especially over the last 4 or 5 years. Bridget Burns is here, one of our main platforms for spreading the word about some of the techniques you've been hearing about has been the University Innovation Alliance, and we've worked very closely with Bridget. I'm honored to have my sister here, Tina, here this evening. And then last but not least, some of my colleagues from Georgia State, Jim Weyemeyer, and especially President Mark Becker, who have provided a context where we could do things that in many cases we didn't think were possible, but President Becker not only thought were possible, but thought were absolutely necessary. And that provided the context for amazing change in a short period of time. So I'm going to tell a little story over the next few minutes that is about one institution, but is about the possibilities that we have nationally to change the dialogue about higher education. Georgia State has never had a particular prominent profile, and some of you in the room tonight may be hearing about it for the first time. Our history is one of being overshadowed by other more prominent institutions around us. We're definitely not Georgia Tech, the elite technology school that's only a few blocks away from us in downtown Atlanta. We're also not University of Georgia, the football powerhouse, and the cheers are coming almost on cue. National championship game this year and so forth, the big flagship. If there's anything that distinguishes Georgia State historically, it's our geography. The office I work in every morning is literally 4 blocks from Ebenezer Baptist Church, the church where the Reverend Martin Luther King and his father before him were both head pastors. Our campus has the very uncommon distinction of actually being bisected by a National Park Service historic district, the King District. And we're also very close to his gravesite, which is right there on Auburn Avenue, which splits our campus in half, and his childhood home. So we're living in this geography that is infused with historical significance. And yet, for much of our history, Georgia State did not live up to that legacy. We were segregated well into the 1960s. As you heard from Terry, as recently as a little over a decade ago, we were failing our students across the board, but especially our students of color. Our graduation rates hovered around 30%, but we were a poster child for the achievement gaps. The students of color graduated at lower rates than the white students did. The low-income students graduated at lower rates than the middle and upper-income students. You could set your clock to it. That was the way, year after year, semester after semester, the outcomes would be. And what makes Georgia State's story important, I think, for others out there is we were not living in a context where the universe was conspiring to make sure that we would be able to turn around these numbers. We were trying to do this in a decade where, as President Becker arrived and as we were launching some of these efforts, we were going into one of the deepest recessions this country has seen. And Georgia and Atlanta, which were boom states and cities, a city beforehand, were really hit hard by these outcomes. And the students who enroll at Georgia State were often the victims of those losses of jobs and the losses of homes and defaults on mortgages and so forth. We were not getting more rigorous in our admission standards. Actually, over the time period we're talking about, our incoming SAT scores went down by 33 points. and we were not dealing with more resources from the state. In point of fact, we have about $40 million less in state appropriations now than we did towards the beginning of these efforts. But what we did is we publicly posed a really difficult and initially uncomfortable question. In the face of these failing outcomes, we asked the question, are we the problem? How are we contributing to the fact that really 7 out of 10 students who come to Georgia State with hopes and dreams are leaving with debt and nothing to show for it? And we began to use data very aggressively to diagnose ourselves, put a mirror towards ourselves, and really look at our programs. We had a huge problem with summer melt. For those of you not familiar with this term, it's a really disturbing and growing phenomenon nationally, where students who do everything right, especially from urban school districts, they graduate from high school against the odds. They apply to college, take SATs, get into college, confirm their attendance, even come to campus and register for classes, but they just never show up. It's not that they don't show up for your college or your campus, they don't show up for higher education at all. Back in the summer of 2015, we did a data analysis. We tracked all the students who we thought had confirmed and were going to be part of our freshman class who never showed up. And we found out that over 300 of them a year later hadn't attended a single day of post-secondary work. We looked at the profile of these students, majority low income, almost all students of color. These are exactly the students higher ed needs to succeed with. And they were just melting away during the summer. Whose fault was it? They had graduated from high school, and what Georgia State had done is put about 14 bureaucratic obstacles in the way between them and the first day of college classes. Apply for financial aid, turn in your immunization records, pick a major, register for classes, all these different hoops. And as we analyzed at each one of these, there was a subset of students who were dropping out off the radar screen. And just not attending. And for the most part, these kind of obstacles were differentiators with regard to race and ethnicity. So you think of something as innocuous as you have a requirement that students who are starting college have immunization records. Makes sense from a public health policy. But it's a big differentiator when it comes to race and ethnicity, because which students are not going to have those records at hand? It's not the middle and upper income students who just go to mom and dad and say, send these in, and it's taken care of. It's the students from low-income backgrounds who have spotty health care who say, I don't have those records, guess I'm not going to college after all. So what we've done at Georgia State in this example and others is try to find ways to deliver personalized attention to students at scale. We're not a particularly well-researched university. So in the summer of 2016, to deal with the summer melt problem, we launched one of the first AI-enhanced chatbots nationally. Chatbot is a automatic texting platform. What we did is build up a knowledge base of common answers to frequently asked questions by incoming students. And we partnered with a technology firm to help deliver that knowledge base on smartphones. So students could go and text 24/7 and ask any questions they wanted. And what we found is that while we estimated that in the 3 months leading up to the start of fall classes, our freshmen would ask maybe 5,000 or 6,000 questions and get answers, that in the 3 months leading up to the fall of 16, they in fact asked over 200,000 questions. Average response time was about 7 seconds. We did a RCT, a random controlled trial, and worked with Lindsay Page from University of Pittsburgh to do this. And she found some interesting things. Not only did this produce better results in an empirical sense, and I'll say a little bit more about those in a minute, but qualitatively, what she found out is that students were willing to ask questions of the chatbot that they weren't willing to ask of a human being. I don't know where my biological dad is, and so I don't know who should sign this federal form that requires my parent's signature. They were more likely to ask this tool in their hands than they were to sit down or pick up the phone and talk to some stranger and spill out their personal history. And what happened in a single year, just because of the use of that chatbot, was a 21% drop in summer melt. With a school the size of Georgia State, that translated into over 300 additional students who were sitting in their classes the first day of class for fall 2016 for a year before, who were not part of the higher ed experience at all. You heard in Terry's very kind introduction some of what we've done with predictive analytics, where literally we're tracking about 50,000 types of interventions every school year at Georgia State. And again, when we scaled up that program, where we were reaching out to students about these small areas, we call it GPS advising because it's like the GPS in your car. right? The advantage of a GPS system compared to the old way of navigation was you used to make a wrong turn, you didn't realize it for 20 minutes or a half hour or 45 minutes, and it was almost impossible to get back on track again. Now, as soon as you make a wrong turn in your car, there's that voice saying, you know, we're going to recalibrate and immediately get you back on the right path. Well, these 800 risk factors we're tracking for every student every night are designed for the same purpose. That if we can get students to immediately realize that they just signed up for the wrong course, or they just underperformed in a quiz that makes them at risk of not doing well in the midterm that's coming up in a few weeks and so forth, and get them help then rather than 6 weeks, 8 weeks, 2 semesters after the fact, then we're much more likely to keep students on track. And as you heard, there too, we saw a big differentiation between the results we got. All the students did better once we launched GPS advising, but the students who did better by miles were the underserved students, the students that didn't have the support system at home to nudge them in the way, to tell them to go seek a tutor or go get help, and so forth. Now, what has been very gratifying is that this whole model of trying to deliver to students at scale personalized attention is catching on nationally. I can see it viscerally in my experiences because I'm so often out there on the road. We've worked collaboratively with the University Innovation Alliance, 10 other large public universities, including Arizona State, to try to scale these innovations and propagate them across other institutions nationally. Over the last 18 months, we've had over 200 campus teams come to Georgia State and try to learn what we're doing and then bring these models back to their own campuses. And you know, through all of these efforts, there are a few basic lessons that we've learned at Georgia State, which I hope will extend this story from that of a single institution to what can be a new model for especially the delivery of public education at institutions that are not elite in their resources. One is that this is not a matter of finding college-ready students or preparing students to be better college-ready. There's been so much emphasis upon that in our national discourse in education over the last generation. This is a story about recognizing that what we need to do is create colleges that are better student-ready. We need to transform the basic way students interact with the institutions and the basic way we construct institutions. And until we take on that responsibility as a sector, as the post-secondary sector, I don't think we're going to make the gains that we need to. The second lesson we've learned is this is not about targeted programs. If you go through the 16 or so different programs we've initiated at Georgia State over the last decade, not a single one begins with the African American male this, or the Latino that, or the low income or first generation the other. All of what we've done is scaled across the whole university. So when we find something that works, we change the university so every student benefits from that particular intervention. It's not because we don't respect the fact that there are differences between people based on context and background and histories and so forth. It's that those old models were not nuanced enough. You can't assume that every African American male is the same and needs the same kind of intervention and treatment. So now what we're trying to do is truly deliver individualized treatment. This is an African American male student who is a STEM major, who is in his first math course and just struggled in the first quiz. And that requires a different type of intervention than this other African American male student who's a business major and has done well in his first accounting course. What we need to do is deliver that kind of personalized attention because that's what's worked historically for students at small liberal arts and other well-resourced institutions. A third lesson is this need not be prohibitively expensive. That what we've seen again and again at Georgia State is as we scale up these programs across the university, that they really pay for themselves. And increasingly through some of our partnerships, the Gates Foundation has been a great partner in recent years. They've funded a couple projects, a Boston consulting group, to come in and look at some of these programs that we've introduced. And they've walked away, opened our books, have them look at all the numbers. They've walked away with the assumption that doing the right thing in this instance is also the prudent thing for the institution. It generates dollars. If you are enrolling thousands of students and 70% of them are walking away without a degree, what's also walking away is a lot of tuition and fee revenues. And for the very institutions that are struggling the most in student success, they're often the same institutions that are struggling the most from a revenue perspective. And these two pieces can fit together, and I think that's going to help to share and spread this movement. The fourth and final observation, but it really is the most important one, is it's not impossible for us to aim for a higher educational system where there are no achievement gaps, right? That this has long been thought to be impossible, and the explanation for why these gaps exist, especially the explanations used by many of my colleagues in the post-secondary sector, is it starts in pre-K, it starts in K through 12, it's those third grade math scores, it's those eighth grade English and reading scores and so forth. And Georgia State, in a microcosm, and increasingly the institutions that are following a similar model, have proven the lie that is that claim, that we have much more power in our hands than we've given ourselves credit for in the past. And as a result, we have much more responsibility to change, and to change rapidly, because every month and every year that we wait, there are thousands of students who are flunking out, who are dropping out, who are losing faith in our institutions and walking away without the credentials that we promise to deliver. So, what does this all mean? Well, the reality at Georgia State is that we have now, I think, for the first time maybe in our 100-year history, lived up to our geography. This institution that was segregated well into the 1960s and underserving our students of color as recently as a decade ago, as you heard, for each of the last 4 years now, has conferred more bachelor's degrees to African Americans than any college or university in the United States. Our graduation rates for African American males, they haven't increased incrementally. They've literally tripled over this time period. And for the first time in not Georgia State history, but U.S. history last year, Georgia State conferred over 2,000 bachelor's degrees to African Americans. No institution in the United States has ever pulled that off before. And this is not, let's celebrate Georgia State. This is, let's roll up our sleeves and recognize that there's a model out there that we can do so much better by the students who have entrusted their future in us, who put their hopes and their dreams and their promise in our hands, and who for far too many years and really generations we have disappointed, let down, and served poorly. So I am extremely honored and humbled by this award. Thank you to all. But I really hope that this can be another avenue to spread word about a model that's out there. It's affordable, it's effective, it doesn't take decades to implement, and our students are owed nothing less than that. Thank you very much.